Oh, lasso. Anikerable.
Okay, so Geshe started with a verse from the Jataka's tales, and it begins by saying that hearing is like a lamp that dispels darkness. So we begin talking here about the importance of hearing, and especially in the Lam Rim, it is very important to have extensive hearing. Then, on the basis of whatever we hear, whatever we listen, we can contemplate the meaning of that, and eventually we can meditate on the essence of that. However, all these activities clearly rely upon the initial activity, which is hearing, listening. So hearing for us is very important. As the analogy says here, it is like a lamp. So we know if we enter into a dark room, if you have a lamp with you, you can walk in with confidence. If you don't have a lamp, you remain in that darkness. You don't even know what is around you. So similarly, if we lack the lamp of hearing, we will have no idea about the nature of the object. It's very important that in the beginning, our ears actually hear that explanation, right? And then by hearing that explanation, we can start processing this in our mind. We can think about it in our mind. And in this way, we can develop the wisdom derived from hearing. Then on the basis of this, we can further cultivate the wisdom derived from reflection and the wisdom derived from meditation. But if we didn't have that initial hearing, there would be nothing to contemplate. There would be nothing for the mind to think about, right? So there will be no process of understanding the object at all. So the very important verse that says hearing is like the lamp that dispels the darkness of our not knowing, of our ignorance. Okay, so we have the analogy here of ignorance being like the darkness and hearing being similar to the lamp. So we, for example, we are in a position where we have some understanding of the Lam Rim. There are some portions or some subject in the Lam Rim that we understand. How did we come to understand them? How do we come to know them? We came to know them because there was some teacher at some point who gave some explanation, and we were present at those teachings, and we heard that explanation. So based on hearing that explanation that some teacher gave, we removed our ignorance with respect to these subjects, that now we say we know them, we understand them. So it is like this. Due to hearing, we remove ignorance with respect to whatever subject matter is discussed. Now, it is similar to the example of going out, and based on what our eyes can see, we remove ignorance about so many events, situations, products, and so forth, isn't it? If we did not rely on that information that we receive from our eyes, we would not be able to remove our ignorance with respect to these objects. A very simple thing, even our face, we are very familiar with our face, but unless we examine our face in the mirror in the morning, we don't actually know how we look. But by relying on our eyes and the mirror, then we can say, oh, today, oh, I have this here, or I have that there, oh, this was removed, this is gone, and so forth. Okay. So it's very important that in terms of Dharma, in terms of the subjects of the Lam Rim, in terms of all the extensive teachings of the Buddha, we rely upon hearing. To give you an example, ordinary example, in a classroom, you have a teacher who is teaching English language to the students, and he begins by teaching them A, B, C, the alphabet. And on that particular day, the students have generated new wisdom, understanding, knowing the alphabet, meaning they have removed their ignorance in terms of the English alphabet. Okay, so if that teacher teaches them 100 different subjects, it means they remove ignorance, 100 different types of ignorance, and they generate 100 different types of wisdom. If the teacher teaches them 200 objects, explains those, they remove ignorance with respect to 200 objects, and they generate wisdom, new wisdom, with respect to 200 objects. So you can see hearing is very important. So all of you have definitely gone to school, you have been educated, so you're very familiar with this process. You go to school, you go to the class, and a teacher is there to give you a lesson every day. You hear the words of the teacher, who explain something you don't know, these words remove ignorance with respect to that particular object that is explained. And then your mind can process this information. In this way, we generate the wisdom derived from hearing. And every time we remove one portion of ignorance and we generate one portion of understanding, we generate one new quality. So if we do this every day, obviously the qualities accumulate, they build up every day. Having generated the wisdom derived from hearing, the next thing that we do is we generate the wisdom derived from contemplation or from reflection. So you have all studied Lorig, so you know how this works. To induce or to generate the wisdom derived from contemplation, you have to actually think about the reason. So for example, we begin by saying sound is impermanent, because, and then we give the reason. So we have to understand the reason, and this reason removes the doubt that we have in terms of the impermanence of sound or whatever other object. We have doubt about many things, and therefore going through this process is the best way to remove whatever doubts that we have. And eventually we cultivate familiarity, we meditate on that object, and we have the wisdom derived from meditation. Now, the first line from the Jataka tales was saying, hearing is like the lamp that dispels the darkness of ignorance. And the next line says, it is the supreme of treasures that no thieves can take away from you. So we know that the different qualities and the understanding that we have does not occur overnight. It is something that we have to work hard. So as we said, we have to remove each portion of ignorance, and for every ignorance you remove, you generate wisdom, you remove your doubt, so you develop one new quality, and day after day you build up all your qualities. So this is like building a treasure of understanding and treasure of qualities. And from amongst treasures, this is said to be the most secure. It is the supreme one because no thief can actually steal it away. Nowhere in the world has this situation happened where someone educated themselves, they built up the knowledge and understanding, and then one day a thief came and stole away the knowledge. This doesn't happen. So as we say here, we talk about the qualities of understanding, of education, or you could say the qualities of faith or belief, the root of virtue that you create. All of those are qualities, the treasure of qualities you have cultivated that no one can take away. Similarly, anything you have trained in. So, for example, you might be a good writer, or you could be a translator, or you might know to do something that is very useful for others in society. So that knowledge and that experience that you have is the treasure that no one can take away from you. Or the science in the mind of a scient, or the realizations in the mind of Mahasiddha in India, for example. These are not things that can be stolen away. Therefore, it's a treasure that is very different from material treasures such as gold and silver. If you have gold and silver in your house, you will always uncomfortable, even let alone thieves from outside. Even members of your own family might want to attempt to steal these valuable objects, and you're always worried. However, the qualities of the realizations of education and so forth cannot be taken away. So you see that when we talk about those qualities, these are internal qualities that have nothing to do, let's say, with the external appearance of the person. Is the person tall? Is the person fat? Well-fed and so forth. It's nothing like this. And similarly, the quality, let's say, the quality of a good writer is not found in the pen. Okay, it's not the pen, it's the writing that the writer is capable of composing that is important. So these qualities, this treasure we talk about, are really imprints that we have placed in the mind due to relying on previous hearing and reflection and developing familiarity and so forth. Now, some people say, where are those things? I cannot see them. And sometimes people say, where is negativity? I can't see negativity. Show me negativity. Yes, indeed. Negativity is not something that you can show externally. Negativity is an imprint that we place in our mind, isn't it? So in Lamrim Chenmo, we have mention of the importance of hearing. So it says, if you actually cultivate hearing, if you have hearing, this will give, this will generate special interest and joy in your mind in terms of turning your mind towards the Dharma, in terms of having faith towards the three jewels and so forth. And that joy that you have will make you very keen to train in the three Pitakas. So, for example, you will want to engage, that you will be very interested in engaging the training according to the Vinaya Pitaka. So, it means through that training, if you rely on hearing, reflection, meditation, you will be able to minimize and abandon a lot of faults of the body and the mind. So this whole issue of 10 virtuous actions you will be able to subdue, you will be able to minimize this. Also, you will develop interest in training in the higher training of concentration that is presented in the Sutra Pitaka. So that means that you will be able to develop a mind that is undistracted, a mind that remains single-pointedly on a particular object. And in this way, you can, again, abandon many faults. Also, if you have interest in hearing, reflecting, and meditating in Abhidharma Pitaka, it means you will train to develop wisdom, whether it is wisdom understanding impermanence or wisdom realizing emptiness in different levels, the coarse level or the subtle level, and so forth. Again, you will be able to generate antidotes to afflictions, eliminate afflictions, and this will lead to obtaining the state of omniscience. The third line from the Jataka's tale says that hearing is the supreme weapon defeating the enemy of ignorance. So here we identify ignorance as the enemy, and rightly so. So the enemy is never an external enemy. Obviously, when you have an enemy and you need to destroy them, overcome them, and so forth, you need the proper weapon. And it says here the strongest, the superior weapon is hearing. So as you can see, hearing here is described as having many great features, many important qualities. So we know that by relying on that hearing, we will be able to generate the wisdom realizing selflessness of phenomena. And in this way, we can put an end to cyclic existence. We put an end to afflictions that give rise to cyclic existence. Similarly, in entering the middle way, describing the 10th ground bodhisattvas, it talks about their wisdom, and it says the wisdom is like the fire that completely burns away the wood of afflictions. So in the future as well, we hope that by depending on our hearing, our study, our reflection, our meditation, we will be able to generate the direct realization of emptiness that will destroy the wrong views or grasping views. And once we destroy these views, we will destroy all the attachment, the hatred, the pride that come from them, and we will not need to remain in cyclic existence. So all these afflictions will be burned like the fuel, like the wood that is burned when you have a fire. Another expression, very, very good saying, is that meditating without relying on hearing is like practicing with your hands, trying to do something with your hands tied up. And it is like this. If you have not heard any explanation on this subject, and then you attempt to meditate on it, it's like trying to do a job with your hands tied up. You cannot really function. You cannot do it in this way. And we know how important hearing is, not just in terms of our Dharma practice, but in society. We need to be educated. We need to learn skills. And in order to do this, we join a class. And when you go into the class, you're going to the class to receive some explanation. You want to hear these words of the teacher. And the teacher must actually pronounce those words. Unless these words are communicated and we hear them, we cannot do something. Imagine if you went into a class and the teacher remained silent, and from time to time, perhaps try to communicate something with some, hand gestures. Obviously, you wouldn't get the best lesson, isn't it? So it's very important to rely on hearing. And here, in the context of the Lam Rim, it is very important that we have extensive hearing in order to be able to be successful in this practice. Okay, so it's very interesting because at the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha gave all these teachings, the 84,000 bundles of teachings, at that time, the teachings were not recorded. They were not written down in paper. So there were no scribes, no one transcribing, no one recording the teachings and so forth. But what happened was that the followers of the Buddha were bodhisattvas who had great amount of merit, and therefore, when they were present at the teachings, they would hear perfectly the words of the Buddha. They will keep and retain the words of the Buddha, and also they would understand the meaning of these words. So they had perfect understanding and perfect recollection of these teachings. And from that point onwards, the teachings were communicated in the form of an oral lineage. They were not written down during the time of the Buddha. So, the teachings will be given as listen carefully, and I will explain what took place, or what happened, or what the Buddha says, and so forth. So that was the style of the teaching. After the Buddha passed away, the great followers, the great bodhisattvas, and so forth, had meetings. And in those meetings, they felt that it was important to record these conversations and these teachings, the advice that the Buddha had given. So, for example, you can see Shariputra saying, oh, in this occasion, I said this, or in this occasion, I heard that, and so forth. And the various bodhisattvas would contribute in this way in terms of what they said or what they heard as an answer, and those things were recorded. So it is important also to understand through that the altar that we have now, right? So you know how we have the altar and we have representations of the body, the speech, the mind of the Buddha, and we have the great collection of texts to the right and the left of the altar and so forth. So this is a very recent, a very late development. Okay, so initially at the time of the Buddha, there was no such organization or arrangement of the altar. It was much later that there will be, for example, people would say, oh, I'm a follower of the Buddha, and eventually there will be like a single statue of the Buddha, right? So that was the kind of like the first form of an altar, and eventually it built up to representations of body and speech and mind of the Buddha. So these are later developments of the altar. So listening to the instruction is very important. And it is important because through listening, we place imprints in our mind. That is the great importance. For example, sometimes we recite Om Mani Padme Hum 100,000 times. Why do we do it so many times? It is to place imprints in the mind. When you go into the classroom, there is a teacher, okay, and obviously the teacher has to give a teaching, and they have to decide about the level of the teaching that they're giving and the intention. Why are they teaching with this style? All right. In any given class, you will have students that are very sharp. You will have students that are on the middle level, and you have students that are the least confident. So the teacher, when they're giving a teaching, they are aiming, let's say, at the middle level, but really it is through their compassion that they want to prepare and they want to support the students, even those of the least capacity, to elevate their level, isn't it? So obviously those who are sharp, they come into the class and they often think, oh, that was easy. There was nothing challenging, nothing new. I've heard this before. I know this. Okay, we might say that was easy. That was an easy class today. That is an indication we have heard this information before, but it doesn't mean that we can practice it or that we can have the realization and the experience of that meaning. So, for example, if we have a class on bodhicitta, many people will say, oh, I know all about bodhicitta. I know what bodhicitta is. Bodhicitta is, to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not a difficult class, right? But actually, in terms of practice, can you practice bodhicitta? Can you generate the realization of bodhicitta? This is very difficult. Okay, so we mentioned, going back now into the essence of refined gold, we were at the section where we said that to actually hear it talks about consider the beneficial effects of hearing the teachings of the Lam Rim. And it says that whoever is a suitable vessel to receive this collects benefits equivalent to those gained by having heard all the words of the Buddha. So obviously, he's talking here about some great benefits. However, for the student to acquire such great benefits, they must have the right type of teacher. So we're talking here about a teacher who teaches with the proper motivation and is very wise, very learned, and able to explain things in great detail. So Geshe says, not like someone like me. I'm only here merely to read the text, answer one or two questions, but I don't have these qualifications of the teacher. As we say, the proper qualifications of the teacher is that the teacher is always motivated by love and compassion, and they always seek every day to constantly improve the mind of the students. So this is different setting or different aim from the setting that we find in a normal classroom, right? So when you talk about an ordinary classroom, you have, let's say, the aspirations of the parents, you have the aspiration of the students, you have the aspiration of the teacher. Okay, so obviously, the teacher wants to teach a particular subject, the student wants to study that particular subject, let's say it is science and so forth. However, there is no specific interest or effort made to cultivate and improve, let's say, the ethical side of the mind of the student. But when we have a Dharma class, for the Dharma teacher, this is very important. Okay, so we started last week, or last class, whenever it was, we mentioned this quotation on Lam Rim Chenmo. It is found on page 63. The quotation comes from a text called Exhortation to Wholehearted Resolve. So wholehearted resolve here indicates an attitude that is like this special intention. Whatever you want to do it wholeheartedly. Right? If you want to study bodhicitta, if you want to train in bodhicitta, you want to do it wholeheartedly. Whatever activity you do, whether it is Dharma activity, whether it is a worldly activity, the best thing is to do it wholeheartedly, with a special intention. And then we have this other word that says exhortation. Exhortation means to motivate someone to do it in this way. So as we see here, it is the Buddha that is giving advice to Maitreya. So that was Maitreya before he became enlightened. Okay, so the Buddha is addressing the Bodhisattva Maitreya and says, Maitreya, there are 20 benefits of the generosity with which you give gift of the teaching without concern for material things, profit, or honor. So very important thing here. He's talking about benefits of teaching the Dharma. But when we talk about benefits, these are understood to be qualities. They are not the benefits such as gaining fame, gaining reputation, or having material gains such as money and so forth. Actually, if you give teachings motivated by these types of benefits, then it does not become Dharma. It goes into the other direction of non-virtue. Okay, so as we can see here in the quotation from the Exhortation of Wholehearted Resolve, the Buddha says, Maitreya, there are 20 benefits of the generosity with which you give a gift of the teachings, without concern for material things, profit, or honor. So again, the important thing at the beginning, the Buddha clarifies that whoever is the teacher who is imparting this teaching, they have to be completely free of this attitude of seeking for service, material gifts, this type of personal gain and profit. Rather, they should be motivated with love and compassion and wish to benefit the student. So if you give teaching like this, then you as a teacher, you will develop or you will receive 20 types of benefits. The first one is recollection. So recollection is very important. It means you remember what you did. You have recollection of an object, an event, and so forth. For example, we come at the end of the day and we have recollection of whatever we did in the course of the day, from the morning until the evening. And like this, we can have recollection of many events going back many months and years and so forth. Now, having recollection does not necessarily guarantee that this is virtuous, because recollection can be virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. So obviously, if you have recollection of a Dharma subject or a practice of Dharma that you did or you are doing or you are going to do, then this is considered to be virtuous recollection. However, if you have recollection of let's say something negative that you did, or your wish to recollection of the thought or the intention to cause harm to someone and so forth, this is negative recollection. And then we have the neutral recollection. So let's say you have recollection of your cup, or you have recollection of a cup of tea that you had in the restaurant. So it's not virtuous, it's not virtuous, so it's neutral and so forth. Okay, so recollection here means you are not forgetting, you retain that. So in the context of Dharma, in the context of the Lam Rim, you will retain the different subjects of the Lam Rim, for example. Okay, so the first is recollection. The second one is intelligence. So actually, as you can see here, we are supplementing the material, because the Essence of Refined Gold does not, it just mentions the great benefits, you collect benefits, but does not explain. So it's too short. So to understand this, we need to supplement it either from material of Lamrim Chenmo or Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. So here, again, in Lamrim Chenmo, we see that we just, in this quotation, we just have enumeration of those 20. But if you look at the Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, each one of those 20 is expanded, is explained. The second one is intelligence. So important thing here to remember that we say that if you teach Dharma in this pure manner, you will develop recollection. And as later on, you will experience the result that is according to the cause. Okay, so for example, when you build up education over many years, this will have that result of that recollection of all that training. Okay, so that was about the first one, which was recollection. The second one about intelligence. Intelligence refers to the certainty that you find that comes from the wisdom derived from meditation. So when we talk about intelligence or that certainty, it can be conventional or it can be ultimate. So conventional refers to wisdom that we derived in the mundane paths, or the ordinary paths of the path of accumulation, or the path of preparation. And then we have supramundane wisdom, that is certainty, that is developed further on. The results that we have from that is that it will reduce your attachment, it will reduce your anger, it will reduce your ignorance, and the maras will not be able to overtake you. So as you see here, we have mention of those four special results according to the cause, meaning we will reduce our attachment, we will reduce our hatred, we will reduce our ignorance or confusion, and we will not be overtaken by the maras. So the maras here, or the demons, it's important to understand them within context. When our teacher Buddha Shakyamuni reached the state of enlightenment, he overcame the four types of demons, which is the demons of aggregates, the demons of afflictions, the demons personified, and the demons of ignorance. So here, when you try to teach Dharma, there are those who cause interferences and want to cause harm. But if you continue with those teachings, with these activities of the teachings, you will come to understand the meaning of the intention of the Buddha, but also you will receive protection. Now, often we talk about guardians or our protectors, and these are deities or different types of beings who are on the side of Dharma, and they try to protect us. When we engage in Dharma activities, we receive hostility, not just from humans, but from non-human beings. But through the guarding activities of guardians and protectors, we remain safe. Okay, so let's go through the entire list of the 20 qualities. The first one is recollection, and then the second, intelligence, the third one, understanding, the fourth one, stability, the fifth, wisdom, the sixth, supramundane wisdom, the seventh, little desire, eighth, little hatred, and nine, little ignorance. Also, number 10, demons will not find an opportunity to harm you. Number 11, the Bhagavan Buddhas will think of you as a precious only child. Number 12, non-humans will guard you. 13, deities will bestow charisma and power on you. 14, enemies will find no opportunity to harm you. 15, friends will remain steadfast. 16, your words will be trusted. 17, you will attain fearlessness. 18, you will have abundant happiness. 19, you will be praised by the wise. And 20, your gift of the teaching will be worthy of remembrance. Develop belief in the benefits of explaining the teachings from the depths of your heart as they are set forth in many collections of sutra. So Geshe was saying this is the list. We have explained some of those points. Anyway, Geshe says I will not cannot give you a full explanation of each one of the points. But however, what the Buddha has said is that the teacher who gives Dharma teachings with the right pure manner accumulates those 20 benefits, those 20 qualities, and also the students, if they listen with the right attitude, they will also accumulate those 20 qualities. So if we look at this sentence that we have in the Essence of Refined Gold, it says, consider the beneficial effects of hearing or teaching the Lam Rim even once. An understanding of Buddha and his teaching arises. So what that refers to is that great faith and great respect for the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha will arise. And it says, by means of pure attitudes and application, a person who is a vessel suitable to Dharma. Okay, so the benefits are collected from the side of the student if the student listens with a pure attitude, with pure application, and is a suitable vessel to receive that particular teaching of Dharma. So it's very important here to examine the pure attitude and the pure application, because these are things that are important for the teacher as well as they are important for the student. All right. And it says if you listen in this way, you will accumulate benefits equivalent to those gained by having heard all the words of the Buddha, because we have said that this is a feature of the Lam Rim, and here the Essence of Refined Gold, that by listening to the Lam Rim, you receive the summary, that you consolidate all the important points of all the teachings of the Buddha. So first of all, let's talk about the correct attitude. So the correct attitude means that from the side of the teacher, when they give these teachings, they have to give the teachings with the right motivation. So sometimes the teacher has, there are teachers, not every teacher, sometimes there are teachers who do not want to really share everything that they know. They always want to keep something back because they think, if I teach them everything that they know, maybe they will become better scholars than me, maybe they will become more famous than me. So they always keep back a certain portion of the teachings. Another bad attitude is that they exhibit a sort of laziness in the sense that they avoid the difficult parts. So they might teach the easy parts, the easy things to explain, easy to understand, and then they just gloss over the more complicated parts of the teaching. So again, that's a bad attitude. Another mistake in the attitude is that they are teaching under the influence of afflictions. So for example, they could be teaching whilst they are harboring anger. There could be, and therefore that comes from the teaching, and they start talking and criticize other teachers, for example, and so forth. Or they could be teaching whilst they're really bored. So all of these are mistakes in the attitude of the teacher whilst they're giving the teaching. So the person who is giving the Dharma teaching must have those 5 qualifications. the last three is having those three attitudes that says the teacher is similar to the Buddha. The teaching is similar to the medicine, and the person who is listening is similar to the patient, the sick person. So we have explained the attitude of the teacher, and then also we say they have to have a proper application. So the proper application means that whilst they're giving the teachings, they should maintain cleanliness. They should wear clean robes and so forth. They should be clean. The second one is that they should sit on the throne. The third one is that whilst they're teaching, they should maintain a pleasant expression. So you don't give teachings looking gloomy or threatening towards the students. And the last one is that you give teachings and by using many examples, many quotations, various types of reasoning, stories, anecdotes, and so forth. That was actually the style of teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni. He would give many examples and give many stories. And there are sutras composed of that, of the teachings of the examples of the Buddha. So this is the right attitude and right application of the teacher. Okay, so having explained these qualities and characteristics from the side of the teacher, we need to look at the qualities of the student. So as our text says, in terms of the student, therefore, abandon the three wrong attitudes, liken to a dirty pot, a pot with a hole in its bottom, and upturned pot, and generate the 6 recognitions. In this way, you will be able to gather the wealth of having approached the subject properly. So from the side of the student must listen with an attitude that is free of the 3 faults and has the 6 recognitions. For the 3 faults, these 3 faults are discussed in many texts because this is a very important issue. The first one of those faults is being like an upturned pot. So a pot that you have turned upside down. If that is the case, no matter what you pour into this pot, like you try to put food, you try to put milk, you try to pour nectar on the pot, because it is turned upside down, nothing actually enters inside. So being like an upturned pot refers to the state of our mind when we are receiving the teachings. So obviously you are, let's say in the Gompa, you are surrounded by your Dharma friends, but the important thing is what happens in your mind during the teachings. Your body is obviously present. You are sitting, and probably you're sitting, upright and so forth. However, the mind is uncontrolled. Often we make this analogy that the mind is like the monkey. The monkey, because it jumps and moves from one place to the other. So physically we are present in the Gompa, but the mind goes to the office, goes to the market, goes here, goes there. So if you are like this, obviously, the information is not coming in. You're like the upturned vase. So they say to derive the best benefit of the teachings, your mind should be as your body, meaning you should be present and alert and upright. So we have explained the first fault, which is the fault of the upturned pot, meaning that your mind is not receptive, you're not listening, you're distracted. The second one is like a dirty pot or like a smelly pot. So here the example that is given is like, say that you have a pot that is made out of the best possible material, so gold, and the pot is standing up. So it is open, the opening is available. However, inside that golden vase, you have some filth, some dirt, some very dirty substance. And then on top of that, you pile, let's say, the best food, the best fruit, and so forth. To whomever you are going to offer this pot or this golden plate of food, the person will refuse to take food, isn't it? Because he will say, no, I'm not eating from that plate. The plate might be gold, but inside you can see the filth underneath the food. So you're not going to eat this. So this gold pot or the gold plate represents the precious human rebirth, this body with all the freedoms and endowments that we have achieved. But the filth within the gold pot represents the wrong motivation. When we go to the teachings, and we harbor this sort of like suspicion for the teacher, like, I don't think they know that much. Let me go there and see if I can catch some mistake. So trying to criticize and pick up mistakes in the presentation of the teacher, or because you think, all right, if I go and attend this teaching, like I can put it into my list of teachings I've attended and I will be someone important and famous, right? So the wrong motivation is what makes the pot dirty, smelly. So, for example, when we talk here about the dirty pot, as we say, the golden pot represents the precious human rebirth, the type of body that we have. However, within that body, we harbor a mind that has the wrong motivation. To give you an example, we might be attending these teachings on the Lam Rim and say, I will listen, I will reflect, I will meditate. For what? For the purpose of this life, because I want to become famous in this life and so forth. If we are thinking in this way, then this activity does not become Mahayana Dharma. Like, forget about Mahayana Dharma. It doesn't even become Dharma activity. So it's this wrong motivation of seeking pleasure, recognition, some benefit in this life. So we come now to the third fault of the listener, which is like a pot with a hole in its bottom. So, all right, so here we have the gold pot. The pot is turned upside down, and this time is clean, and you pile it up with some delicious food. However, the pot has a hole at the bottom, so it's a leaking pot. So despite being piled up, you can put food, you can pile up food, but everything comes out, nothing is retained. So this is the analogy for the case where we come to the teachings, we have the right intention, the right motivation, we listen to all those teachings. However, because we don't have recollection, we don't retain any information. Everything we hear is just leaking out. So obviously, this is very important to overcome. We need to have recollection if we want to perform any meditation on this, any revision meditation of the points. We need to remember those things. Okay, so as you can see here, we talk about being, in the text, it talks about being the suitable vessel, and you are the suitable vessel if you are free from the three mistakes of the vessel. This is something that the Buddha has talked about, and also we have a presentation of that in the Ornament of Realization. Okay, so one thing is here to abandon the three wrong attitudes, and the other one is to generate the 6 recognitions. So the 6 recognitions, first of all, is that I am like a sick person. The Dharma is like a medicine. The teacher is like a skilled doctor. Depending on my practice, I will recover from my sickness. The Tathagatas and the teachers are holy beings, and finally, depending on my efforts, the teachings should remain for a very long time. Okay, so let's look at each one of those attitudes. The first one is the attitude that says, I am ill, I am the sick person. Now, some people might object to that and say, I'm not ill. Right now, I'm quite healthy. There's nothing wrong with me. Okay, so when we talk about illness or health and well-being and so forth, obviously we examine them in terms of the body and in terms of the mind. Again, in terms of the body, although right now, at this moment, we might feel well and healthy and comfortable, it only takes a small change in the external conditions to bring about illness. So, for example, right now, you might be quite comfortable with the air conditioning on, but if the air conditioning was off for a prolonged period of time, that will be uncomfortable, and this could generate illness. The thing is that even if we are physically on top physical condition, the thing is that until we reach the state of enlightenment, definitely we experience mental illness. So we have the illness of attachment, the illness of hatred, the illness of pride, the illness of competitiveness, the illness of stinginess, and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about the illness of attachment, for example. Okay, you go out in the market and you see an item that you like. You become attached to it. However, you cannot buy it because the price is beyond your capacity. And then you come back home and you are disappointed and you say, oh, I wasn't able to buy that object. So right there, that frustration, that disappointment is the illness of attachment. Or, for example, someone says something unpleasant to you and you hear these words and you become angry. How dare they say this to me? This right there is the illness of anger. And similarly, we have many other types of illness, the illness of jealousy, the illness of stinginess, and so forth.
Good afternoon. This question is related to today's teaching. So if there are some teachers from Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana vehicles who are not perfect and who are not having the correct attitudes. So as a student, can we still continue to attend his class or his teaching?
Any questions? Okay, so as we say here, Geshe was saying that it is important to understand that we are not perfect and our motivation is not perfect. Obviously, the Buddha has given us a lot of advice saying you should abandon all your afflictions. However, here we are, and all of us, we're still struggling with these afflictions. So the Buddha has said you should practice generosity, but here we are, we're very limited in our capacity to do those things. So it is important to understand that, okay, you might perceive some fault, but the most important thing is that you do not openly attack and criticize that other person, teacher or not teacher. And from your own side, you try your best to have the best motivation. Okay, this is the best we can do. And also the advice that we have in the Lam Rim is sort of like a general presentation. It doesn't actually say you should have this motivation or, exactly that motivation. As for whether you should rely on the teacher or who you rely on the teacher, Geshe says, in my case, from the first class, I made it very clear that I am here just as, not as your spiritual teacher, but as a general teacher, someone who will just discuss and present this material. And I don't have the expectation that you take me on as your spiritual teacher. Also, to give you another example, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, he goes everywhere. He travels everywhere in the world. I mean, these days, not so much. Often he would visit many universities and so forth, many educational places and so forth. Although he will go into all those places and give advice, it's not the case that everyone who was present in those teachings took His Holiness the Dalai Lama as their guru or the spiritual teacher, all right? So just by attending one class, it doesn't mean you necessarily take that person as your guru. Yep. Okay, so Geshe was saying, of course, especially when you're going to the West, we have all this presentation about karma, about past lives, future lives. There's the doubt whether people accept all this, isn't it? Okay, and actually it's very hard to implement everything that you study and you read or you hear here in the text, but it's very good that we know what the texts say about these issues. Okay, and in terms of our practice and our experience, even though we might not be perfect, we see that if we follow this, there is benefit. Okay, so this point here that the first attitude is the attitude that thinks I'm the patient, I'm the sick person. Okay, do not take that literally, like you're wealthy now. So if suddenly you start thinking I'm sick whilst you're healthy, obviously this will be wrong awareness, isn't it? This is not what the Buddha intended. This is not what is intended. Here, this is a certain attitude that we cultivate in terms of our practice, right? So obviously we have attachment. Attachment is illness. We have hatred. Hatred is illness. So from that perspective, you say, I am the sick person. Okay, so the second attitude is that Dharma is like the medicine. So you can see here that in those attitudes, we have analogies. We said that the Buddha taught by using a lot of examples, analogies, quotations, and so forth. The reason why we have this is because to just give a straight presentation, it's very difficult to understand the meaning, but if you also give an example, an analogy, and so forth, it becomes easier to understand. So here we say that Dharma is like the medicine. Obviously, if you have recognized yourself as being someone who is suffering from the illness of attachment and hatred and so forth, like every person who is sick, you will understand that what you need is some sort of medicine, some medication. We do this when we are physically ill, right? When we are ill, we're looking for an appropriate medicine. So here we are ill with the sickness of attachment, of hatred and pride. But if we practice appropriately, gradually we will be able to develop our realization of emptiness, our realization of bodhicitta, and so forth. And those things will become antidotes that can eliminate these afflictions. The third recognition is the recognition of the teacher as a skillful physician. So we know, for example, when we are sick, what we need to do is we need to go and find a doctor, rely on a doctor, so that the doctor can diagnose our condition and tell us what is the right medicine. Otherwise, not to rely on a doctor, but instead go down to the pharmacy and decide for yourself, I will get this medicine or that medicine. This is very dangerous. You can put your own life into danger. So similarly here, we need to rely upon a teacher, and we need to listen and reflect to develop understanding. Otherwise, if you just engage on, let's say, study of Dharma on your own, you just read the text on your own, you just do practice on your own without relying on the teacher, then this will not be beneficial. The fourth attitude is that by relying on my practice, I will recover. Okay, so as we say, you were ill, you went to the doctor diagnosed, and obviously gave you a prescription that says in the morning you take this pill, at lunch you take this pill, in the evening you do this. Okay, if you then look at this instruction of the doctor and you decide to ignore it, not to rely on the advice of the doctor, then again, you're not going to recover, and you're putting your own life at risk. So this is important, because when we rely on the teacher will give us some instruction, some advice. If we do not practice accordingly, we do not have much chance of overcoming our afflictions. We will not place the right imprints. We will not improve in the practice. Then we look at the fifth attitude that recognizes the Tathagatas as being holy beings. So obviously, for someone to become a Tathagata, they had to work up in order to amass accumulation over 3 countless great eons, and that makes them a holy being. So it means to always maintain and cultivate faith and respect for the Buddha. The last attitude is that I practice in a way that, or depending on my practice, the teachings should remain for a very long time. So teachings here refer both to the transmitted and the realized teachings. So we should always think in this way in terms of our practice. Okay, so going back into our text, this paragraph that covers the material we have been discussing is the one that says, consider the beneficial effects of hearing or teaching the Lam Rim even once. So it talks about collecting benefits, and therefore it says, abandon the 3 wrong attitudes and generate the 6 recognitions. In this way, you will be able to gather the wealth of having approached the subject properly. Whether you are studying or teaching a Lam Rim text, do so purely and with intensity. So as you can see here, it's urging both the teacher and the student to approach these teachings of the Lam Rim with the right intention, the right attitude. And if it is done properly, as we say, we accumulate those 20 types of benefit. And then so this applies to any Lam Rim text, even that you received. So whether it is the Song of Spiritual Experience, whether it is the Refined Gold, Essence of Refined Gold, and so forth. Essence of Refined Gold continues in the next paragraph by saying, Je Rinpoche said, one session of hearing or teaching this tradition, embodying the essence of all Buddha's words, collects waves of merit equivalent to hearing or teaching all Buddha Dharma. So this is a verse from the Song of Spiritual Experience. Okay, so here with this, we finish the preliminary section. So from our next class, we start with the actual part of the text, and the first subject that is discussed is the proper way to rely on the teacher. Thank you.